How's it going?
You know, okay, except for COVID.
Yeah, we were supposed to actually meet at my house to record, but uh, yeah, you got a bit sick, and I got a
Yeah,
tour
so we're
coming
three
up, so
blocks
I don't really
apart,
want to.
but
Yep, yeah, we're actually neighbors for all the audience here, but Ilya's a bit under the weather, and I don't want to catch what he's getting. Although it's kind of funny because I did text you. It's like, given the amount that amount of people I'm exposed to, it's like, what does it matter actually? So. But you look like you're doing okay with COVID. How's it
yeah,
been
I'm
this
totally
time?
fine. Yeah, it's fine. It's a sickness, but it's something I'll get over pretty easily.
Yeah, yeah. You had it before.
Yeah. So
Yep.
last time I had it, I was in Meta. That was the day that we had the big layoff that made all the news.
Mm.
And like, I found out that I had COVID the night before, and then
Oh.
the next morning we were going to get an email whether or not we're safe. So that was fun.
Oh,
Uh,
great.
yeah, I didn't get much of a time off for that last time, but this time I took a couple of days.
That's good. So,
Yeah.
awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's actually funny. I was at the pharmacy this morning. I was getting a couple vaccines. They're like, do you want the COVID vaccine? And I'm like, I would love to, but every time I take that, I actually get worse than I do when I actually just have COVID. Like I'm out for 2 days if I get the vax. It's nuts. Like and I get chills, hallucinate. It's a good time to listen to audiobooks, but man, that's just get wrecked. It's like maybe I'll come back. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway,
I haven't heard the
um,
term hallucinate applied to humans in a long time, like in a year and a half. Uh,
mm,
so
yeah, it happens. It happens. The vax. I don't know what it is about it, but it affects me like really badly. So I don't know. It's like I just have trauma from it. But anyway, enough about that fun stuff. I guess for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
sure, yeah. And if it drags on, cut me off. Give me a little, I got
You might
enough.
be hallucinating. I
Uh,
don't know.
yeah. Who knows? So I'm Ilya. I've been in tech for about 14 years. 10 of them in machine learning engineering. Went from the government to Adobe. Spent quite some time leading a team in Adobe Analytics that was responsible for all of machine learning that we delivered. And then went to Twitter, where I was responsible for all offline model evaluations. I figured Twitter would be a great place to work. Really loved the culture, super stable. Same guy was in control of it the whole time. So came to work for Jack. And then Jack kind of decided that he's had enough. And I was like, Parag, Parag actually had my same job just a few years earlier. I'm like, that's fine. Like I'm sure that would be great. And then Twitter kind
Interesting.
of disappeared into nothing. So I went and worked for Meta in monetization there and ads. I led, I guess I was the technical lead for two teams, so about 24 to 30 engineers, depending on when exactly you catch me. Uh, Totally burned out. And then now I work at a Series B startup here in Utah. I'm head of Edge ML right now. So yeah, fun stuff.
Fun stuff. So you've been in the ML space for a long time. Um, what are some of the things that stand out as changes in the field that you've seen since you got started in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. First of all, it's a lot more competitive, right? Like,
Hmm.
people ask all the time, like, "Hey, how do I get a job in ML? Like, really want to work there?" And I'm like, "Listen, when I got in, you basically just had to say I like math." And like, if you liked math and you like were willing to do ML, people were like, "Yeah, fine. Like, come on in. Like, this is great."
Right.
And then the boot camps started, and then the universities started producing like really high quality kids to where like I remember at Adobe like 4 years in, I was like, man, the kids who are coming out of college now, they know as much as my junior engineers did like a year ago, and
Hmm.
they're just phenomenal people really entering the field. I think the hype cycles are the same. You've been in it about as much as I have, and we're in our like what second or third now hype cycle, and those come
Yep.
and go. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of maturity that came to it. There's like a lot more separation. Like when I entered the field, data scientist was about the only real term that anybody applied. And now, like,
Yeah.
there's huge separation in what the jobs are. A lot more appreciation for data, I think. We used to just be like, just throw it all in, see what comes out. And then we found out what comes out. And what comes out is never pleasant. And I think right now there's a lot more maturity of like, hey, let's get our data pipelines right. Let's like make sure we understand the
Hmm.
actual problem and what we're trying to do. There's some areas that are quite mature that work really well. Vision works really well. Recommenders
Hmm.
work really well. And those are all huge props to the people who've built that.
Oh yeah.
Over time, because recommenders initially were not this good, but um, there's some other areas that are still catching up, but they'll get there.
What areas are you thinking of?
So I'm particularly thinking of language, and I know that that's a spicy take because it's like, oh, we've solved language. We have LLMs now. But it just kind of depends on what it is that you want, right? Like if what you want is what we've been working on for the last decade, which is like text summarization, I don't know, sentiment analysis, like all of these topics that used to be separated, and now LLMs kind of brought them together, then I think we're seeing definitely a lot of benefit from these new architectures, but I wouldn't call language particularly solved yet.
Right.
Not to the same level as like images are, you know? Um, and yeah, time series analysis is solved with custom models. I would love to see something a little bit more uniform, because right now the way that you would
Mm.
go about really solving time series analysis problems is like sitting down and writing pages and pages of algorithms, and eventually it would work. Again, people would disagree with the uh, attention mechanism. Like that's definitely a step forward. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I think there's still a few steps forward yet to go. Reasoning, planning under uncertainty, those things are catching up still.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what OpenAI Strawberry has, because I guess it's supposed to, I don't know, be better at reasoning, whatever that means, and apparently has some really
Interesting.
good math capabilities. But who knows? I mean, I think that's well. I think it was also that it was called Q Star from what I was reading, and that's the thing that freaked everybody out last November, which apparently led to the coup that occurred. So another Ilya actually was involved in that, but we'll see. I don't know. It's all insider stuff and it's all secret, and I have no idea. I can only speculate on my own. But yeah, the reasoning stuff is it's still like it feels like it's still TBD, but it's there's a lot of people working on it, so we'll see. So
Yeah.
either like we'll solve it or we're all doing it the wrong way, and I don't know. So,
Or both, right? Like we
it could be.
might
Yeah.
be a little bit wrong. And yeah, it's interesting. Like intelligence in particular, right? That's the big topic always. Like, oh, artificial intelligence, right? And um, yeah, I noticed you said, we can't have AI, we can't even have BI yet. But like I look at it from a different. I totally agree with that, but I look at it from a different perspective. I'm like, well, we got the A pretty well down. It's just the I that we're having a problem with right now. Like,
Oh
there's just
yeah.
no intelligence there. But how do you even define that, right? Like, would a dolphin define intelligence the same way that humans do? And are
Yeah.
dolphins more intelligent than human? Maybe. And
Octopus. I
so,
mean, they're pretty smart. Yeah, it's interesting. And that article I wrote to the most companies want to do AI, and most are barely doing BI. I think that it was more, I think, to highlight that um, change is really hard. Like digital transformation is hard, and when you start throwing in just a sheer number of companies are still struggling with doing basic reporting, and now they
mhm.
want to jump into AI. And I think the whole point was like it's totally possible. But the way you would start winning with AI, I think, is not trying to tack it on to existing stuff. Like you find ways or find use cases that are uniquely situated for things like machine learning, right? Where you're trying to scale things beyond what humans can do, right? Image recognition is a perfect example. If we had
Yeah.
a million people looking at images, that's ridiculous. Just have an algorithm look at that and do it that way. But like I was talking to somebody who works in manufacturing at a very big drug company, and they had to synthesize millions of documents because there's a lot of
Mhm.
documentation in pharma. That's how it is. And so and they figured out a way to do this with an LLM, and it works reasonably well. Actually, I mean, I don't know the accuracy requirements are for such a thing in pharma. I would imagine it needs to be good, but that's an example of scaling something where machine learning is a good fit. But I was actually just writing about this on replying to somebody on my Substack, because they're like, well, how do my machine learning engineers or data scientists don't think the BI data is useful for ML, and I was like, I can tell you why, because like the data is highly refined and it usually has the answer already in it that you are going to try and use as a label. So it's like it's not the same data that you would use. So it is interesting.
Yeah, no, and I consult with quite a few companies. Started kind of after I left Meta,
Yeah.
and never let go of that. And you kind of come in, and everybody expects miracles based on the demos that they've seen. And man, I wish we did fewer demos, honestly, at least publicly. Like there should be a disclaimer. Like
Yeah.
you should sign a paper saying, "I understand this is a demo. The results might not, you know." But you come in and you're like, "Okay, well, great. Like, so give me like 1,000 examples of this in your company so that I can come up with a model and train it." And they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
we have like 5." And you're like, "Okay, like fine, I'll work with 5. You know, they're Bayesian techniques. I can do that." You go in and the 5 are not even tagged correctly, right? Like they're not even the same between the 5. And you're like, you don't understand. Like I have to be able to show some examples to whatever algorithm I create. And if you're not able to do that consistently, you're wasting your money with me. Like, you know, but
Well, at that point, it's a rules engine. It's just like
exactly.
So
When I was at Adobe the first year, I remember we were kind of all sitting in a clump together, like my team was, and the director comes by and he's like, "So, you guys gonna do like some magic today?" And I like, for whatever reason, like that was just the wrong day for me to say that. And I turned around and I'm like, "We do math, not magic. Like, I cannot do magic. If you don't have anything, I can't bring you anything." You know, so yeah. But
how did that go
we had
over?
a good relationship. I don't mean to sound
Okay,
adversarial.
that's
This
good.
was more funny than adversarial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
What do you see? I see you do consulting. What are you seeing out there in the wild? Like, is there a
Everybody
lot of
wants to use
interest in it?
LLMs.
Mm,
Every single person wants to use LLMs right now. Um, and, you know, they're useful in a lot of cases. Um, they're like the application that you talked about, right? Like where you are able to take huge corpus of documents and at least point people to the right page to read.
yeah.
If not, like just give them the answer. But yeah, I've worked with a couple of people who've tried to do this in engineering, and what we figured out is that their documents were not useful in the first place.
Oh,
But most other industries, most other industries don't suffer with that as much. But yeah, like anything regulatory definitely has that. I actually worked with a smaller company. I'm not going to name any names, but
no,
a
don't
smaller
please
company
don't.
in the medical industry. And I do not ever want to work in the medical or any highly regulated industry because, like, even getting access to data, right? Like, even being able to like experiment is like such a hard process that you're like, yeah, in ML, the person who wins is the person who iterates the most. And if I can't even get access to data, like, I can't iterate that much. If I have to, you know, fill out forms and sign off my firstborn son every time that I need to look at something, you know, that's going to slow me down. So, yeah.
A lot
Yeah.
of
But
opportunity
I
in the
also
medical
see a
space
lot
if you
of
got the patience
companies.
for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
But I'm the same way
Uh,
with you. I just don't want to deal with it for a lot of reasons. So anyway, what were we saying?
well, and like the other thing is, right, there's a lot of untapped potential elsewhere. I was just going to say, I see a lot of places that bring in folks from the data side and build out good, robust data pipelines for the first time in their company history. And you come in and you're like, hey, now I can do like 20 things for you. Like I can do forecasting, I can do, you know, sentiment analysis on your customer feedback. I can do all of this just because you've done like a small amount of work in standardizing your data. And, you know, that's terrific. Those are great opportunities. I see a lot of people who are trying to build internal teams. Uh, it's really hard to build an ML team when you don't have an ML team because somebody's got to know like who to hire at least. And that's a hard skill because engineers don't make good hiring managers for ML engineers, like typical software engineers don't, uh, because we speak very different languages, right? Like for me, there is no unit test in my algorithm at the end of the day. At the end of the day, what proves the value of my algorithm is whether or not I do well on the evaluation set. And that's not a concept that like engineers like to hear. Engineers like to
Mm.
have like a test. But
That's interesting. Walk me through the process of building and managing ML team.
oh, that's a good question. I don't think I've ever thought of that this way. Um, so you mean from scratch, right? Like I'm a company, I
Yeah.
have nothing. I I,
Well, let's
I
do two
maybe have a
scenarios.
good, yeah,
One from scratch, and then one you walk in and inherit a team.
yeah. So from scratch, there's nothing there. There's maybe good data. If there's no good data, I'd say don't even bother hiring an ML team. Like
Right.
let's figure that out first. Um, but you need so my bias is to keep it small. So I have this device right there. It's the Oculus headset.
Hmm.
And I think that's what happens. Like Meta Oculus is what happens when you take a project that you haven't proved out and you say, here's $1 billion, go burn it. It's like, yeah, of course I can burn $1 billion, right? But like if you get a small targeted team and you say, hey, like your survival depends on the next iteration of this, uh, they're gonna take a much smaller scope that's much more likely to be successful, and then you can grow from that. And so I think one of the things that's important is to understand that you are not going to try to overhire. You're not going to bring 6 machine learning engineers right away. You're going to bring in 2. You can't bring in 1 because you have to like be able to read each other's code. But you're going to bring in 2, right? Or 3 maybe tops. And you're going to have a well-defined project for that. And this project is something that can move the needle so that you can come to executives who don't understand anything about ML engineering, uh, and uh, and say, hey, whatever number you care about, different for different companies, but usually revenue, right? Revenue without was X. Revenue with is X plus whatever delta that you can muster. And so then you start looking for those 2 people. So who are those 2 people? They have to have really good product sense. The first hires have to have really good product sense. Um, I don't care how good your product manager is, you end up carrying some of that burden no matter what as an MLE because you know what's possible, right? You're not the person who like watched all these demos from OpenAI and you're like, hey, great, like Devin, like we can replace all our coders tomorrow. Like, why not? And you're like, no, 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 no. They're like, there's a lot of nuance here. So you're going to bring in 2 people with pretty good product sense, who can just churn through experiments. Not good code. I specifically in like the early hires, I specifically look for people who write messy code fast. Because again, ML is about the number of iterations. At some point, yes, you need to mature, but at this point in your team building, don't. And that's it. One of them then becomes the technical lead. It's a job that many people don't want to do, but
Mm.
usually on a team, I was right here at the University of Utah when I went to school, and I had a human computer interaction class. And I remember the professor came in one day and said, "Okay, you'll be doing this project in groups of 2, and one of you is going to be the leader." And we were like, "Groups of 2 with a leader? Like, what are you talking about?" And he's like, "The only thing worse than a team with 1 leader is a team with 2 leaders." So that
Mm.
that really stuck with me. I'm like, okay, every team should have 1 leader. And then over time, they will produce something that moves the needle. And if they don't, I mean, that's pretty much the end of your ML experiment for a while.
Okay.
But hopefully they produce something that moves the needle. And then you're going to start scaling in whatever it is that you need, right? Like, for example, in vision, you need to label data a lot. Um, and so like maybe you scale a little bit toward labeling before you hire more MLEs. Or maybe you just keep hiring MLEs and like say, okay, like we have a recommender here, now we need a recommender there. So that's how I would approach it in that scenario. Um, but you definitely have to show value over and over and over again. Too easy in
Mm.
ML to fall into the trap of doing tech demos. I know companies that have teams that have been there for years who are like still in the tech demo mode, never shipped anything, been
Jesus.
there for like 3 years, you know? Uh,
Wow.
and like they're cool. I can show lots of cool stuff, but you have to ship. You have to move the bottom line. And if I'm coming in and the team already exists, then you know the question is how well are they doing? Like, are they moving the needle? And if they are, like whatever works, right? Like I've seen some funky setups. I've seen people report to like functions that you wouldn't even think of as ML literate, and you're like, fine, like whatever. You want to report to salespeople? I don't know. It works for you. Who am I to say
Yeah.
no, right? Like if you're moving the needle, who am I to say that your setup is wrong? We're very data driven in this field, and the data is at the end of the day, did you move the metric?
Mm-hmm.
So
That's interesting. And I guess if you're stepping into a new role, I would say, taking over a team, would it be worth asking why the last person left?
do you think you're going to get a straight answer?
You might. I think you at least get a hunch of what happened. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it depends who you ask.
So I'm not going to name the company. It's a big company. It's one of the FANG companies. I interviewed with them several years ago. And you know how in the interview, a thing that people don't do that drives me absolutely nuts is they don't actually ask questions that are relevant to them, because like you're going to come work here. So like please use the last 5 minutes of the interview to ask a question of like whether or not this is a good place for you to work. So I go through every round, and in every round I ask the same thing. I ask, tell me one thing you really like about this company. Tell me one thing you really don't like about this company. And to that second question, every single person on the team has the same project, like every one of them. And so my final round is with the VP of engineering. And I ask him, like, what about this project? And like, he was dismissive. He was like, my team are idiots. Like, I don't believe that they would like do this. And it's clear that like that's fresh, right? Like it's clear that that project was there recently. I did not accept the offer.
What?
So like yes, sometimes you do get true answers to these kinds of questions, but you have to be a little bit strategic about it, right? Like you have to have so much information that at the point where it matters, you know that what you're asking is the real question. Like, hey, what about
Mm-hmm.
this? So yeah. Yeah.
Well, and it's
But
interesting too, because oh yeah, go on.
no, go ahead.
Oh, what I was going to say is it's kind of harkens back to something you had mentioned earlier, when, especially with the consulting, where you see a wide variety of companies. But I know in my experience, it feels like, especially things like data science, whatever that is, and machine learning, it tends to be. I think it's hard getting a straight answer on whether or not there's actually something going on or not,
Mm-hmm.
like real stuff. Like I trust that a FANG company, for example, they're probably doing ML because that's what keeps the lights on and keeps the apps running and everything else. But in a lot of companies, I've seen quite a bit of bait and switch. I mean, I blogged about this years ago. I think I called it the data science bait and switch or something like that, where
Mm-hmm.
you talk to a bunch of people. You can't really get it. You sort of get the version of the story that yeah, we're going to change the world with what we're doing. It's amazing. And you show up and it's like nothing going on. A couple like I
Yeah,
don't know
no,
sklearn
and if you're
modules.
talking about being the interviewee, right? Like, yeah, like I'll tell you from the interviewer perspective, this is why, like in a behavioral interview, you never say like, "What would you do if you had this problem?" Right? You say, "What did you
Hmm.
do when you had this problem?" Uh, and uh,
Yep.
and I feel like it's the same when you're on the other side of the table. That it's like, no, like tell me a problem you solved with ML. Oh, we have this
Yeah.
wonderful project that's going to revolutionize the world. Okay, tomorrow. What did you do yesterday? Right? Like that's the question. And if people go away from that question, that's a pretty good answer, right? Like if I can't tell you what my team did with ML, like that's a pretty good answer already. And honestly, like it is, I don't know. I fluctuate on this. I fluctuate on whether I think there are a lot of people who've like commercialized ML, like with some value, or whether there are very few of those people, and like everybody else is just like basically lying. I don't know the answer to that, because again, having come from big companies, like yeah, I know we've commercialized some big ML projects, but also like, you know, I don't know who gets the credit for commercializing Meta's ad recommender engine. Definitely not me. It was there years before I ever joined, right? So
That's a good question. That is a good question. And I think it also depends on like how baked the ML is. Like again, at a place like Meta, I'm guessing it's very well baked and it works really well. Like that's what the company's built on. But if you go to like,
would you be surprised if I told you that in 2022,
hmm,
my team, which was responsible for, I can't say the exact percentage, but double-digit percentage of the revenue, ran about 30 ML models to do that. Not a single one of them on a GPU.
old
All
school,
CPU models.
interesting.
We have since moved. We have since been moving them toward GPU, but as late as 2022. Like, you think that Meta has like their stuff together, right? And you think that GPU is the better place to be, but we didn't do it. And we didn't, like, there are reasons to it, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
expensive to buy that many GPUs. We were in the process of doing that. We don't, like, Meta doesn't use third-party cloud providers. We don't use AWS or GCP or anybody like that. So like, we have to build that out ourselves, and that takes a long time. Originally, a lot of those architectures were written in Cafe 2. And so
Oh,
like,
dang.
there's some cost to upgrading that, you know. But yeah, like, probably one of the most lucrative ML systems in the world a year ago was on CPU only. So
That's actually super cool to hear.
yeah,
I have a guess of the models you were using, or at least the approaches, but I probably
we've
won't
published a
say
lot of
much.
that stuff. A lot
Oh,
of
you
that
have?
stuff
Okay.
is out there.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So
if you, well, I mean, okay, so if you go to like, I think I would wager to guess some form of time series is among the most widely used algorithms. Call it ML, call it stats, whatever in the world, right? But every company has some sort of time series or forecasting. If you're doing supply chain, you have to have forecasting. It doesn't
yep,
really work if you don't, right? And so, but I know historically a lot of those algorithms, they ain't that complicated. You know, you can obviously get you mentioned LCMs and stuff. You can certainly get it complicated if you want, but it's like I know a lot of successful companies are still doing stuff. Yeah, that could be CPU and probably, to be fair, it could be done in a spreadsheet depending on the complexity of it. But yeah, I think that's actually, but it speaks to basically like I think everyone wants to try the fancy new tricks. Like I've heard people talk about like, well, LLMs are going to replace all the other algorithms out there. And I'm like, I don't think you know what you're saying when you say that.
yeah,
It's like these aren't the same things at all. So,
yeah, for sure.
um,
Well, and yeah, I mean, I think in the time series analysis, ARIMA derivatives, right, like SARIMA, SARIMAX, or whatever, like, those are still probably the most common models, but they're like statistical models. They're not ML models necessarily.
right.
Um, I do think that Transformer has a chance of outperforming them. LSTM, I don't think does,
It
but
doesn't.
Transformer architecture, I think will, maybe, maybe, but the cost is like way bigger, right? Like, this is one of the things in
Yeah.
Vision. This is one of the things that I'm looking at right now. We at my company, we deploy um, Vision applications to like devices that are on cellular networks, and
Hmm.
like, the difference between deploying a CNN, which does really well,
Yep.
and a Vision transformer, which does a little bit better, is uploading 500 megabytes to a device versus 2 gigabytes. And so when you multiply that out by the fleet, however many times you want to update the model, right? Like, is it worth the cost? And oftentimes the answer is no. Like,
Hmm.
there is the coolness factor. There is a coolness factor of like, oh, I can go from like 98.3 to 98.5% accuracy. And like, oh, of course, like, publish a paper about that, CVPR, you're golden, right? But like, in the real world, is there really a difference between 90 and 95?
Right.
Sometimes not. So, and this is what I mean, right? Like, this is a conversation you would have never had in 2016. In 2016, you'd be like, oh, my model does a little better, ship it. Like, they're not even a concern about this. But this is the maturity that we went through in the last like decade of saying like, no, 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 these are like engineered systems. They're, there's a law in California that just got gutted completely, but it says, hey, by the way, if you're an MLE, you train a model, you ship it, it causes societal harm, you are liable for that. And that's what happens in the aviation industry, right? Like an aviation
Mm.
mechanic signs his name to, or her name to everything they do. And if the accident is because of that part, they will come to you. I actually dream of doing more comparisons between aviation industry and what we do, because I think they're stunning. And, like aviation has learned over time how to keep people safe in an activity that's inherently unsafe. ML is inherently unsafe. Like I said, no testing. But if we put in correct practices, if we put in correct engineering practices and like learn the lessons, and from every failure, like remember when Google had a problem when they predicted gorillas for people with brown
Yeah.
skin? And then like 7 years later, they still had that problem. Like the first problem, I get it, right? Like you're training something, like something goes wrong, whatever. 7 years later to have that same problem is not acceptable. Like there's got to be something there. I'm not arguing for regulation. I think we can do it ourselves, but we need to do it. We need to get
Hmm.
mature enough to where we say, we're responsible for these things. We're not just going to vomit them into the universe and say, here you go, good luck. you know, and not for
I
nothing.
recently
There is
did.
an effect. There is
Yeah.
an effect that I noticed that happens like at some level of automation where, Dr. Ning talks about this a lot, how there's like different levels of automation, right? And like at some point, like ML might be really good at saying, hey, like, have you checked this? Like maybe you didn't see something or whatever. Uh, but if you do that well enough, at some point the brain just turns off. The brain just says, okay, just trust whatever this says. And that's like the most dangerous place to be, is
Yeah.
where it's good enough for you not to notice most problems. This is where I think self-driving is today. It's good enough for you not to notice most problems. And so when you really need to notice a problem, you can't. So yeah, we need to be more responsible about that. And we need to think about that from the whole system perspective rather than just, here's the great model, 0.3%
Right.
better.
This reminds me of a conversation I was having. I actually just posted a podcast about this recently, but it was my one of my best friends who's a pilot. Has been a pilot for almost 30 years, maybe a bit longer than that. So yeah, cargo, passenger, big jumbo jets across the Atlantic. Now he flies private planes for billionaires, and it was an interesting conversation. I think one thing that stood out was he lamented that pilots tend to get really bored with their jobs because after like how good do you have to be as a pilot? Your mandate is simply not to crash the plane and kill everybody, and hopefully your cargo arrives safely. Like that's literally about it. Like if you can take a plane from point A to B and not crash, like that's pretty much it, right? So what he was meaning by that is like there's an upper bound in terms of how good you can be to get hired as a
Yeah.
pilot, and I thought I actually wrote about this in the context of software engineers, where there's a notion of a 10x developer, and I was like, so who's a 10x pilot? Is it that guy who like landed the plane in the Hudson back in 2009, right? But I mean, he saved a bunch of lives, and that guy's pretty sick skills. But then I was talking further with my friend, and I was like, okay, so give me some examples of like how you would be good at your job. He's like, well, okay, um, autopilot's on, but then an engine blows out, and you have about 4 minutes to figure out how you're going to glide this plane to some sort of safety, right? This is what you're trying to do. This is why
Yeah.
you continue to do simulations and stuff. But that's the thought process, and it's kind of what you said, where it's like these are the edge cases now. Like autopilot does a good enough job for most use cases. You still need to know how to land a plane and when to take over, but for the most part, it's at least what he's saying. Obviously, I don't know anything
Yeah.
about flying a plane, except for playing Top Gun on Nintendo when I was a kid. But it's but it got me thinking. Just everyone's job's different. Like, how do you measure how good you are? Like, what's a good engineer, for example, right? How are you good in the AI or data space. But it was interesting just getting a perspective where, and at least as a pilot, like there's definitely an asymptote in terms of like how good you can be as a commercial pilot. Um, in terms of like moving jobs and getting pay. Because he's like at a certain point, it's like you can't get paid more.
Yeah.
Like, what are you going to do? Like invent like a new flying technique or like do a roll within a big 747 and over the Atlantic? Like, just to show
As a
off? Like, of
passenger, I
course
don't
not.
think I would like that.
No, you wouldn't at all.
The boring pilots are the best for me. Thank you. You know?
Yeah.
But I agree with that. We are in a little bit of a different spot. For us,
Hmm.
it's somewhat similar, right? But like the laws of fluid dynamics just change every couple of years. So it's like, hey, you learned to fly, congratulations, wonderful. And then it's like, oh, by the way, there's this new paradigm. Everything you learned is irrelevant. Good luck.
Right.
And and so like there's that element, right? That keeps things
Hmm.
like really fun in this job. That every few years it's like, by the way, forget all that. Do this. I don't know what I learned. Oh, I can tell you. My master's thesis was actually in vision, and I work in vision right now. And in my master's thesis, I applied HAR cascades to a particular problem. If I pulled out HAR cascades right now, with like CNNs being a thing, I would get laughed out of every single room. Like, there's like the new guys that I hire, like you say the word spline, they run for the hills, right? Like they don't know what that is.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so like that was a state of the art though when I got my master's degree. And well, that was changing from being state of the art when I got my master's degree, but a few years before then, I guess. Uh, but yeah, so that's a differentiator here, is that the laws of fluid dynamics change for us a lot still.
They
And that's
do.
fun, right? Like, look at front end development. I'm not ragging on anybody. Front end development is a super important field, but like, other than a bunch of new frameworks, like it's somewhat stale, I would say. And you see this in the job market too, right? Like the full stack devs at Meta make less. They make 20-30% less than people in like ML roles. Uh, and
Interesting.
that's because our stuff changes all the time and we have to keep up with that. Um, Otherwise we get lost. Otherwise, the new kid graduating with a 2-year degree is going to know more about what you do than you do. And you can't have that. Not as a senior dev.
Yeah, you're right. I was in a Slack group with some in a Slack group with a bunch of engineers, software engineers. And it is interesting. Where I think one of the discussions was talking about just front end development, back end development, and how these sort of go like this.
Mhm.
Yeah, like I don't even know. Like I've done development in the past. I try not to do it anymore, but it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to keep up because then you're like, okay, so if I'm going to build an app, like what stack? What's the latest stack I'm going to use, right? As far as I can tell, right now you'd be going to Next.js, and then tomorrow is probably Next.js or whatever, right? But 10 years ago, 2010, it was the mean stack, right? So that was Mongo Express, Angular, and Node. You would never use that these days. I don't think you would. Maybe
Yeah,
you
10
would,
years
but
before
probably
that, it was
not.
LAMP. I don't think most
It
people
was
even know what
LAMP.
that is
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
But my counter to that is, as a user, when you use a LAMP stack app versus like
Right.
newest hotness, whatever you want, do you even see the difference?
No, of course you don't.
And
Right.
with ML, you really do. Like with ML,
Yeah.
the difference between like a HAR cascade based image classifier and a vision transformer classifier is
Hmm.
like, is like a difference between a toddler and like a fully functioning adult. It's They're not even close, right? Like one is like, oh, cute little toy, and the other one is like, oh no, I can actually get something out of this.
The only
So
time I saw a difference was when we moved into single page apps, right? And that was like
yeah,
10 plus years ago, right? So that was a
yeah,
evolution. But then if you actually develop one of those, you're just like that ends up being almost worse than the the old way of doing it. It's just way more complicated. But it's the same kind of thing in data science, where I think a lot of people like overweighted on the single page application, because like, well, that's what you got to do. Just like everyone
hmm
has to do microservices or do LLMs these days, it's like I think everyone kind of gravitates towards, well, that's the cool thing to do. But you could probably just get by just as fine doing Rails or Django or LAMP, to be frank.
yeah.
It's not sexy, but it gets the job done. But like, yeah, you're absolutely right with ML. The big difference is you wouldn't be taking some archaic method and doing that. I mean,
Not yet,
I would,
right? Like at some point it'll get good enough to where like incremental returns would be less visible. But
yeah.
today I think it's not incremental. Today I think it's like paradigm shifts.
Hmm.
So, and I think we got a few of those left. I don't know what they are. I have theories, but they're very theoretical. Um, but I think we have a few of those left. I think I am not worried about being replaced by AGI in
No,
my lifetime. I'm not worried about that.
it is interesting. Like I was talking with Paco Nathan. He's been working in AI. Geez, he's doing neural networks back in the '80s, I think. It was interesting getting his take because he's seen the whole gamut of the field.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of helped, I would say, kind of helped build the field. But it was interesting talking to him because his impression is really like we've leaned really hard on the statistical on the if we have a pendulum where it's like symbolic and statistical, like we've been really
Yep.
hardcore on the statistical. Now it's coming back to sort of maybe like more middle where you're going to start seeing more symbolic um,
Neurosymbolic,
and,
yeah.
and old school methods too coming back. Like I saw one paper where somebody was using support vector machines with a transformer architecture, which I thought was interesting. I need to dig into how that worked. But then the other one was graphs are coming back in a big way,
Uh-huh.
like, real big. Everyone's into graphs now, at least as far as I can tell, because it provides a context for LLMs, for example, that you simply miss if you have a generalized LLM. It's really good at generalizing. It has next to no notion of context on its own. So it's that the graph provides that, and that's a big area that you're starting to see. So we'll see where it goes. I don't know.
Actually, that's a
Maybe.
really good like concept to think through, right? Because like a lot of these things have come back, right? Like deep learning was out
Yeah.
of favor, and then like we went to Markov models for a long
Yeah.
time, and then suddenly deep learning was an explosion. And so it's actually interesting that there's like 7 or 8 different ways to do learning, and we cycle through them. And every time, we get a little bit better, like either compute goes up or something, like we get more data or whatever. But yeah, at the end of the day, I guess this should give me hope that like paradigm doesn't change that much. There are only like 7 paradigms and they like cycle through. But yeah, it's a cool industry to be in. It really is. Like I wanted
Yeah.
to be here, right? Like I started out in software, and when I like when I first saw the concept of like you don't have to write all the rules. You can just give it a bunch of
Yeah.
examples and it'll figure out the rules. It's like the coolest thing. I read Asimov, obviously, like way back,
Right.
and I'm like, wow, that's actually possible. I mean, I the more I learn about it, the more of a skeptic I am. But it's still a cool place to
Happens.
be. It's still a cool place to be.
What are you excited about in the field?
What am I excited about? That's a good question. That's a thing you don't think about much as a professional. You like think about all the problems, and uh, but looking out, like I think we're not through with the potential of the attention mechanism. I think there's still a lot of places where it could be applied better. I think we're not through with the potential of embeddings. I think, hot take, I think we are through with the concept of throw more data at this.
Mm,
And that probably excites me even more than anything else because it means that, like, for the first time in the last 5 years, we're going to have to put our thinking hats back on and say, okay, if I can't throw more data into it, if I can't throw more compute into it, like I need to start figuring things out for real then, right? Like I can't just have this thing churning cycles. I think to me, the vision of ML, and I see this happening. I really see this coming to fruition. I have like a Roomba in my house, right? Like, and Roomba is a thing that you don't think about very much. But the
yeah.
amount of help that it provides is immense. And so I think of ML as a washing machine. So like a washing machine is a piece of technology or dishwasher in particular. Uh, it works for clothes too, but dishes are a better analogy today. You just throw dirty dishes at it, you turn it on, you come back 4 hours later, it's all done, right? And like the amount of water it saved, the amount of effort it saved, and you didn't even notice it. Like, it just worked in the back. It did its thing. It solved the problem for you, and you came back and you didn't notice it. Now, the corollary to that is my washing machine. When we moved into this house, for 5 years, we looked at it and we were like, this is the worst. We got to replace it. We just don't have, the time to deal with it right now. It just doesn't work. We have to like wash the dishes before we even started. And then I was on YouTube, came across this guy who like does a lot of like fixed stuff around the house. And he's like, oh, you think your washing machine doesn't work, but try this one trick. And the trick was to turn on hot water before you run it. Because modern washing machines use so little water that my house water doesn't get to warm up before it starts the cycle. And so I tried that, and like everything worked flawlessly. Nothing else changed, right? Like same detergent, same everything, like one little trick. And this is what ML is, right? Is like, if you understand that one little trick, if you understand that the water that goes in has to be hot, bam, it's magic. It's like wonderful thing. It changes the way that you do your work. Like, I don't code without some sort of intelligent assistance at all at this point in my life. But I also know how to use that, right? Like, I can't just come in, specify the problem, and have it spit out ready to use code. But like, it does a lot. It does a lot of looking things up in docs. It does a lot of like going into like the root of the problem and getting me the answer that I need at the right time. And that simplifies my workflow a ton. And that could happen across many, many industries if you know to turn the water on hot.
That's such a good analogy. Did you just come up with that? That's pretty good.
I've actually thought about this a lot. I've thought about this one a lot, but you know what? I take that back. I am that articulate. I just came up with it. This just totally just struck me. But
you're a lyrical genius, just like Kanye.
Yeah. So. Except for anybody who knows me in person, but on a podcast where you can like cut things out. That's
yeah.
When you can cut out all the rambling bits, I'm pretty intelligent.
You are. It's interesting. It's kind of closing out. One thing I want to get your perspective on is we both live in Utah. What's your thoughts on the Utah tech and machine learning scene?
I think it's growing. I think there's some promise here, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult to build. So it's a social network problem, right? It's the n squared problem. The problem is that when you go to the Bay Area and you drive like down a freeway and you look on each side of the freeway and it's like, oh, that's a company I know, that's a company I know, that's a company I know. And each of them has like 10,000 engineers. And maybe the proportion of really good engineers is not that great, but still, like by virtue of the fact that they're all in the same geographical location, you get a lot of crosstalk, right? Because like they change jobs and you come from one job to another. And because of that, it's much easier to build up talent to like in Utah. I feel like one of the problems we have is once you go past senior level, there is very little local support. And there's very little local support because there are very few people in that position. And so there's like a cap to your growth because of that, unless you go out and like intentionally engage with other communities. I think it's definitely way stronger than it was in 2015, 2016, that time frame, which is where I first started paying attention to it. The other problem we have is people like you, like once you get big enough, you barely even speak in Utah anymore. You speak all over the world. But I get it, right? Like there's only so much time in life. And there are only so many events that you can put on in Utah because there's an upper limit to this. It's one thing that I feel strongly about. I've put in a lot of effort into it before COVID, and then after COVID, I just kind of have not been able to do much because working at Meta is a 96-hour a week job, and I
Yeah.
don't see my family, so I'm probably not going to show up to a meetup. But I've been thinking about how to re-engage with that community and how to be there to both learn and provide my expertise, right? And see how to help accelerate it. I think the Utah 500 that I know you know everything about. I think that's a terrific idea because again, it's about getting critical mass of people together. And
Yeah.
once you can do that, then you can grow pretty fast. There's a lot of good talent. It's just not
There's a lot.
coached enough.
Yeah, I agree. And there's good meetups happening. Like the MLOps community is actually a chapter of it here, which is awesome. I went to the meetup last week and it was great. A lot of people showed
Mm-hmm.
up, good attendance. Same attendance I would actually see at ML Ops community events in the Bay Area, which is encouraging. So yeah, you should totally get back out there and do it. I think uh, you're definitely a force to be reckoned with. So it'd be great to have you back in the community.
For good or
Yeah,
evil.
there's well, I mean that's TBD, um, but no, I think it's one of those things I've been thinking about too. Like, how do I get back integrated in the community? Like, I might try and give a talk at the data engineering meetup at some point, but I don't know. Like, yeah, my problem is I'm just gone all the time. Like you said, it's like I'm
Well,
not
and
here. So
you have a lot more experience growing communities. And so what do you think work? Do you think meetups are the best place? Do you think bigger conferences, like what is like I was on the board of the Utah Geek events, right? And I think Pat is
yeah,
doing a terrific job of
it just
getting lots
kills.
of people together. Um, and so like what is it that works? What is it that helps people up level? Because a meetup doesn't mean anything if you go home and you're like, okay, like cool talk, right? But I don't have anything in my work that does that. Um, so how do you see that where it can actually change people, right? Like where you can slowly start growing over time from that.
I
Um,
think this comes from when Ferris Chibib and I started the Salt Lake City Python meetup back 11 years ago at this point. I mean, I helped start like a Rails group before that actually, and that was interesting because I think the things that work with communities is um, a sense of continuity and a sense of consistency. Like people can show up and they know they can show up again, right? So I feel like that's like the one thing where people just need to believe that there's going to be another meetup because then you start building the community of people and a network of friends and peers. And I think from there, a lot of things start happening. Like people get jobs. There's a lot of, I think, informal mentorship that happens, between attendees. And I think that's a good place to start. Because once you have that nexus of a community, a lot of things could happen from there. But if you don't have that, I think it's almost impossible. And that's where I think conferences sort of fail is that conferences inherently have some sort of agenda that's not directly tied to some sort of continuity of a community. Well, you could look at things like PyCon, for example. Maybe you can regularly attend that every year, and there's others. But even then, it's a year that goes by and you don't see anybody. You might talk to them on the phone, but I think like the local communities, when I've seen it work, and the meetups I've been involved with, Salt Lake City Python, and then Utah Data Engineering meetup, and then kind of helped kick off or at least made an intro with the MLOps community and so forth. But those again, it's just a sense of community. Like the Forge group is, I think, doing a good job at Clint Barry and Mariah Peterson and those kind of people. But it's like I think they're doing a good job at like keeping a good hold on the meetups and making sure that they're of good quality. And like UJug's the other one, Utah Java Users Group is like probably the best meetup I've ever seen anywhere actually, and that's a Utah Java Users meetup, which
well,
sounds like the
except it's
least
about
sexy,
Java,
least
so.
yeah, but sometimes they have a lot of good talks not about it. So I mean, but I think that it's like the best run meetup I've ever seen. And they've been doing that for years, but they just have a sense of community there that I think is just amazing. So I think that's where you start. Is you got to have just give people something that they can put on the calendar and reliably go to again, and then you get your tribe, and from there a lot can happen. So. Um, but I'm not a fan of conferences for that reason. I mean, I think that there's good ones, good community ones, but a lot of the vendor-led conferences, for example, I don't think foster a community. It's just all about the vendor, and that doesn't help. So it just depends what you're trying to go for. But yeah, I would love to have you back in the community. It'd be terrific. Or terrible, whatever. Just kidding. So,
Okay.
joking.
Well, however it goes now, I'll blame you. No,
Yeah,
I'm definitely happy to show up more. And it's on me to get integrated better.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
awesome. We'll have to have another podcast again. I mean, especially maybe do it in person next time.
Yeah,
Since you're
I'll
really,
I'll
really
try not to
close.
get you sick. I'm out of all my material though. Like that's all I know.
This
I
is
have
all.
to I
So
have to
this
go
is
learn more stuff.
okay. We'll see you back in a year. So no, but you'll be.
Uh,
It sounds like you'll be. You're going down the content game too. So I'm excited to see what you're doing. Is there anything you can sort of hint at?
yeah. So MLE Path on YouTube. So here's where it comes from. So as I got progressively further in my career, I spent more and more time mentoring juniors, right, than actually writing the code. And the more I did it, the more I was like, hey, this is what I like. This is where like the real value is. I had a kid at Adobe who was an intern that I brought into our team. He's a senior engineer now. Ran into him the other day, and he was like, "Hey, thank you for what you taught me." And I'm like, the amount of like satisfaction I get from that, as opposed to like, if you've been on the internet today, you've probably interacted with some ML algorithm that I wrote, but
Right.
I probably won't admit that because it's either in ads or analytics or like something that's like, I don't know that makes a world a better place, right? This actually does make a world a better place. So after I left Meta, I spent a couple of months kind of in the wilderness, and during that time, I coached a lot of people on how to be better MLE, how to get into the job, how to progress in it, and a couple of them were like, "Hey, like you should be doing more of this, like more scaled." Because I have stuff to say. I have been in those rooms. And so that was the genesis of it. Now, the downside to this is I'm not yet good on camera. My presentation skills are not yet, I can present to a group of people, I can talk to you, but it's way harder when it's like just you and the camera. And you're
Mm.
like, okay, like, did I say that right? Did I, so I have about 850 subscribers. Super grateful for each and every single one of
That's
them. I
cool.
know that that's a bet on the future. Me, not the current me, but I will definitely continue doing it. For the first time, I've missed a video for a week because I have COVID. But yeah,
What
once
kind
I
of
get
excuse
past
is
it,
that? Jeez.
yeah, I know. See, like people say that the trick here is to like prepare content in advance and have a calendar. But the problem is I am so bad at it still, like at the delivery part, that I need that hateful comments to come in, and I don't get enough of those. But I need people to come tell me about that so I can improve the next one. Like I said, in ML, it's all about iteration, right? And so we'll get there. I do have some plans of doing more technical things, but the first few videos will be about more career stuff because people don't talk about that at the level that I can talk about that. And then
Oh, you have
eventually,
855 subscribers, by the way. I just subscribed. So,
oh,
um,
hey,
there's one
thanks,
of you
Joe.
laying in a pile of cash like a rapper. That's cool. Good
Yep.
view count though. I'm actually
So,
impressed. It's
so here's the cash. It's not real. Uh, it would
okay.
be.
I mean,
So, but yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I definitely will continue doing that despite being bad at it.
well,
But
that's how
some
you get
people
good
have really
though.
benefited from that advice. So
That's cool. I think it's just a matter of getting yourself out there and making good. The good quote content will come. I think just through repetition. And I mean, if I look back on my old podcasts, the original ones, like they're horrifyingly bad. Like bad audio, bad everything. It was terrible, right? But I think you just you figure out like your voice and you figure out what you're good at. And I think having a good attention to details, good, especially when you're doing YouTube. But like podcasts is a different story. But like, um, I know when Andrew Ng was making courses, like that guy is just maniacal about every single detail. Like we'll just re-record until you get it like absolutely perfect, and everything has to be dialed in. And that's an example of somebody who is world class at producing educational content, right? And I think
Right.
he arguably has the best, some of the best courses ever made. I don't really care what the genre is, but it was just that level of like everything has to be dialed, every word in the script, everything. So it's just, but that's but I think you figure out what works for you. Like maybe you don't want that level of maniacal focus, and you just kind of let it flow more. Like I'm more like that actually.
Yeah.
You just figure
No,
out what
and I mean,
works.
I think I feel the responsibility to get to that point actually, because so like I have 1,000 views, right? And so like if let's say 1,000 unique views, and those videos are about 10 minutes, right? That's 10,000 minutes of somebody's life. That if I could have made it 9,000 minutes, I probably should have. Like
Yeah.
that's a big ask of people. So at some point, I do want to get to that maniacal stage. I'm getting there slowly. I'm scripting a lot more than I used to.
Oh,
The
interesting.
first video was a lot more like, "Hey, here's a bunch of knowledge," and now it's a little bit more scripted. But yeah, it's a good balance. But I'll
But then
rely
you
on
got
you
guys
a
like
lot for advice.
you got guys like Zach Wilson though, who get a lot of a lot of views and a lot of followers, and he's like, I don't even think he has a script. He just sort of, I mean, we did a podcast once, and I think he was just like laying on his bed with his phone the whole time. Like there's like a lot of his videos, and so it's and I think, but it works for him, right? That's his personality comes through in the in the video, and I think that's what people really go for at the end of the day. But everyone's got their, but I'm looking at your videos now, and they're good. So
Well, that's because the sound is off.
that too, yeah.
No, I'm just
Um,
kidding. No, no, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the encouragement. And I think I have every confidence that I'll get better. There wasn't a skill yet that I've practiced and practiced and practiced and didn't get better at. The question is how much better, right?
mhm.
But yeah, definitely about the number of reps. And that channel would have never happened without that lunch with you. Like it was
Are you
your
serious?
encouragement that drove that.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, that's
So
cool. Yeah, that makes my
so
day.
I really do appreciate that, and yeah,
I
I
think I heard
appreciate you being
Substack,
a
and you're just like, oh,
subscriber.
I'll go to YouTube instead.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I don't do things the easy way. There's what is that Simpson quote? The hard way, the wrong way, the right way, and the max power way. Isn't that the wrong way? Yes, but much faster. So, yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I've always found video to be harder than writing, but I mean, after this book's done, I'm going to be going very full into to video. I don't know. I'm
Well,
just
I'll
more
have
comfortable
you on my
writing.
channel any day. Let's
Thank you. Well,
let's
likewise.
talk on there. So,
Yeah.
um,
Awesome. It's
but
good to see you. As always, I'll put a
hey,
link to
congrats on the
the
course.
MLE
Hope
path.
that goes
Thank
really
you.
well.
Thanks.
Enjoy your tour around the world, and whenever you come back, even if you have COVID, by then I'll be very well immune. So
Awesome. Let's
let's
get
catch
lunch.
up.
Cool. Well, good to see you,
Thanks,
man.
Joe.
Take care.
Bye.